The woman's eyes were bloodshot, red, and puffy, boasting about 8 months' worth of grief over unexpectedly losing her mother to an untimely death. I watched as the woman attempted to plead with the baggage agents, knowing that some of her most cherished mementos in remembrance were in the suitcase that had failed to arrive on the slow spinning carousel. As others waited with ease, I noticed tears starting to stream down both sides of her face. She placed one hand over her eyes as if to shield any unnecessary attention from others. The other hand was placed on her chest as she tried to focus on catching her breath. Sliding slowly down the wall she leaned on to sit and gather herself, everything around her became silent. She watched as faces began to stare and point, but with no one stopping to ask if she was okay. It felt as if all eyes were on her, but invisible at the same time. I may not even be doing the story justice because, well, that woman was me at an airport in Spain in September 2022, trying to make it to my dear friend Isha's wedding celebration activities. I wanted to write the introduction of this blog as an outsider because, one, it is cathartic for me as a human and writer, and two, it was how I partially experienced the entire situation, meaning in those moments of a painful anxiety attack, it felt as if it was all happening in real life, but that I could also observe everything from a bird's eye view that was happening. If you've ever suffered a severe panic or anxiety attack, you understand that in those moments, everything can become a blur. The only thing that matters to you, really, is trying to return your nervous system to normal. Disassociation from your body and brain, especially when confronting grief, is also very real. What I do remember is that as the crocodile tears kept pouring, I let them come. I didn't care what anyone in that airport thought. Little by little, I began to feel comforted by peace and understanding that can only be explained, in my lens, through the love of the great Creator. It was as if Christ himself came and sat down next to me and said, "It is okay to cry. You don't have to play strong anymore." The plight of intentionality. I would love to sit here and tell you I always experience this feeling of peace and warmth from God, but that would be a lie. I actually think that when things in our lives are not in crisis or we haven't hit quote unquote rock bottom on our path, or for a moment, in some respect, it may be even more difficult to rely on our faith. And we often end up operating in our own strength or ego, wondering where our discontent comes from, even though, quote unquote, things are going well. In my personal learning journey, I have also realized that my personality is wired in such a way to be driven by beliefs and convictions. This is notable because we all have a unique personality structure, and so others may not feel or experience emotions in the same way we find ourselves connecting with a thought, opinion, feeling, or emotion. To sum me up, so you have a clear picture, I don't really do anything surface level, meaning I deeply drink the Kool-Aid. Who can relate? This has its advantages and barriers, as with anyone's unique personality makeup, environmental factors, and lived experiences. When it comes to designing life with intentionality, I just don't know how true that was in my own faith walk until I began to discover more about aspects of who I was: family lineages, spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional health, personality makeup, and addressing traumas I had buried very deeply and attempted to block out with overworking and social activities. Yes, I do include religious activities in this too, which can become an addiction, obligation, idol, and overextension of oneself, just like anything else. The truth is this: until we realize aspects about who we are and how we are made in the image of the great Creator, it can be quite a frustrating battle to find contentment. In this article, I wanted to dig into the Bible to better study what Jesus taught about intentional living and maintaining a curiosity about what this means for us as modern day believers, practitioners, scholars, and disciples of Jesus' teachings. In John 21, we find Jesus as appeared to his disciples at the shores of the Sea of Galilee, essentially grilling out at the beach, okay? The men on the boat have been casting their net for some time and coming up empty. And again, empty. When they suddenly see a man, Jesus, they do not recognize him as Jesus until they come a bit closer. Jesus encourages them to cast their net to the other side of the boat, proving fruitful as he invites the boat to join him by the fire. Though they were not given a why behind where to cast their nets, they listened and believed the Son of Man was indeed who he said he was. A leap of faith, perhaps spurred on by a desperation to catch food. That's the beauty of the soul's faith journey. It must only make sense to you first. And sometimes our faith is accelerated by the current moment or circumstances we find ourselves. So how does this apply to our lives in 2025 and beyond? The disciples weren't getting any fish, but they did listen to the advice from Jesus. So the first thing that comes to mind that we can learn in our modern day walk with God is to pay attention to what we consume. This can be our physical bodies and the foods and exercise that sustain our vessels or our skin suit. Or perhaps consumption is the books, music, movies, and friends you keep. Exercising discernment with who you decide to listen to feedback from is part of being intentional. When it comes to unsolicited and solicited feedback alike, no matter the source, test the spirit. Pray on the feedback and ensure it aligns with what God is revealing to you. Meditate. Remember, not all feedback is appropriate or well-intentioned feedback. Like anything, we must practice discernment. What we decide to put into our bodies, how we decide to care for our bodies, how we decide to consume or share on the internet, etc., can open ourselves up to a lot, especially living in the digital age of social media, artificial intelligence systems, and so many other humans being accessible to who you are or what you choose to share with them. So how in the big blue world does this scripture help me today in 2025 with being intentional, with faith journeys, friendships, family relationships, professional pathways, and more? How can this help me? How does it apply? So to recap the alignment with John 21, let's look at first, there was intentionality with Christ to say, you know what? I'm going to help them. Being intentional with just offering them a very simple solution, he didn't even give an explanation. He didn't say why. He simply said, try the other side, or cast nets to the right side of the boat. Essentially, he simply says, follow me, like he's asking for us to cast a net and trust him fully. What I've learned from this specific aspect of the chosen scripture for study, that intentional living and decision making is also about surrendering our own vision and sometimes releasing our own control, or rather what we think we have control of. It's just a myth. But what we think we can control in our lives may actually be the source of our exhaustion and discontent. Intentional living comes from exercising radical faith, and that is all Jesus was asking Peter later in the same chapter, in my opinion. Peter even started to get a little offended. In chapter 21, he is almost in shock. Like, me? Why are you asking me if I love you? Of course I love you. I've been there. I know I love God with all my heart. Yet I see where fruit is bitter, rotten, and sour in my life. Yes, at the same time, when I have acted out of lack of faith or without testing the spirit through careful prayer and discernment, thinking I can control the outcome. We all do this to an extent. Consider right now, how often do you think you can control the outcomes in situations? It's similar with friendships, business partnerships, and marriages, etc., because we start to question, how much does this person really believe in me, trust me, and love me? So because there's that doubt we hold, We find then that Peter in this passage is the very person who disowns Jesus in the text. And all that Jesus needed was for there to be trust and a willing heart. And I think that intentionality in our lives is about trusting that God will have the net to catch us when we take the leap can be a very, very challenging aspect of living intentionally, because when we're not aware of how much we're relying on self, others, our own vision, our own selfish ambitions, our ego or pride, all of the things that are just natural parts of being human, we fall into the same cycles, but ultimately engage in cycles that yield rotten fruit. So here's the charge for me and for you, for myself and for thyself, for me and you. There are so many applicable lessons to unpack solely in this one chapter out of the entire Bible. What I found myself reflecting on the most is my own journey with understanding my tendencies for anxiety and depression. These are very common ailments diagnosed to so many of us, among other common mental health conditions that we may wonder, how did this happen? Why am I this way? And the truth is, sometimes it is a bit of genetic predisposition, environmental factors, and our own lived experiences. For myself, if I am in spirals of anxiety, I, 1, try to over control, or 2, fall out of full belief and practicing of radical faith in God. I am naming it because for many years I was just unaware of some of these things in my own life. I just thought, and so did others, you work really hard. My work and career had become an obsession to avoid addressing years of anxiety, depression, and PTSD from traumas. When we are not aware of the things that may be triggering our unbelief and reliance solely on the self, we then often dismiss the parts of us that will require radical faith in order to actually have access to the life that God has promised us, which, as Ephesians 3 teaches us, is exceedingly abundantly more than we could ever ask or even imagine. Intentional living is just as much about radical faith as it is about planning and setting goals while having a vision for your legacy. So until next time, I'm curious, what does intentional living look like for you? How do the teachings in John 21 resonate with your own faith journey? If anyone you know is struggling with severe battles related to mental health, please know you can always dial 988 in the United States to access someone who will listen and try to provide resources 24/7. From their website, the 988 Lifeline is a national network of local crisis centers that provides free and confidential emotional support to people in suicidal crisis or emotional distress 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the United States. We're committed to improving crisis services and advancing suicide prevention by empowering individuals, advancing professional best practices, and building awareness. All right, so I wanted to close out this very special episode 99 with reading that is my next article in the Reflective Edge newsletter. So if you're still here, I want to sincerely thank you all for being a part of the Love Learning You community. We are just getting started, and it feels so incredible just to even know that there's one person who listens, right? Even if I just did this for me, I hope that as you hear this, you hear that I'm on a journey of walking myself to what home is, home for my soul, the purpose of my soul, the path of my life, the progress of my profession, whatever those things are for you, whatever your deepest desires, your hopes, and your dreams. The great creator wants you to have all that and more than you can ever imagine. That is my belief. And if you're struggling in your beliefs, That's also in this same episode, in this same article. So I wanted to introduce the Reflective Edge newsletter officially to the podcast community. And you all are getting the first to hear this. I have not even published this article yet, but check out the link in the show notes. If it's for you, you like research and headier things, you like longer form articles, then go ahead and subscribe over there. That's something I'm really excited to continue expanding as we grow. We have over 350 subscribers already to the Reflective Edge newsletter. And I'm just incredibly grateful that I see another day. Each day that I wake up, I'm incredibly grateful to see another day. And I'm getting a little emotional because I was such a different person, even as I read this back 3.5 years ago and what I was experiencing. I can't wait to share more because these are tears of gratitude that even when I wrote this a couple years ago, I couldn't fathom publicly sharing it. One root memory for me as a child was losing my great-grandma. My great-grandma has appeared to me multiple times in dreams and throughout my life. She was the first significant death at the age of 10 or 11 that I lost. And I had had so many other things happen at that same age. But I felt like I lost a true love in my life, a true representation of God's love in my life, even though I had that, in different ways with my parents and other grandparents. But there was something very special about my grandma Clara. And she had always loved me in such a way that was so big. And I'm not the only one. I have many relatives who, when I tell stories, they say, that's what she did with me. And it's rare. It's rare to grow up with great grandparents and be able to be so close to them. So I'm glad I got those 11 years. But there are also then pieces where I was told, don't cry anymore. Be strong, get over it. And so when you hear those mixed messages in your formative years and you learn the strategies that you think are pleasing the adults around you, we sometimes forget how to cry. We sometimes forget how to be angry. And those aren't bad things. They're things that help us get to the fruits of the Spirit, which are peace, hope, joy, kindness, patience, love, the greatest of them being love, hope. So I leave you with a sentimental note, but also a grateful note. And you might think, oh, she sounds sad. I'm not sad. I did not cry a lot of my adulthood. And I'll continue to share more through the years about that. I do have some structured talks that are not this as personal. They definitely share personal moments of different big griefs and traumas throughout my career and life. Unlikely that they're much different from your own, you who are listening. Meaning, even if you go, oh man, I can't imagine that, or you hear my story or anybody else's story, as humans, we all experience suffering. We all have different capacity and bandwidth for suffering. We all have different giftings that it might make for one person the ability to do XYZ their superpower, and for another person, it could kill them if they lived a certain way. So it is more important than ever to not only know ourselves, but to deeply accept all of who we are, not just the parts we want to accept. The same with our bloodlines, the same with our DNA, the same with the given names and where we happen to be born. How do we accept all the parts of who we are and the things that we go, ooh, I don't know that is like Christ. I don't know that is godly. Then we bury those things and we transform them and alchemize them into something that produces love. Because if the greatest of these fruits of the Spirit is love, anything that is antithesis to that is a lack of love. So if I'm projecting fear, I'm projecting hate, I'm projecting doubt, then there's something related to that situation that is lacking love. Okay, I will quit, but I hope you enjoyed casting your net intentionally. I don't even know if that's the title I'm going to land on for the article. It has not been released yet, but I wanted to read it here and kind of put this as a final episode 99 for 2025. We will kick off 2026 with episode 100, and I am wishing you all a very, very prosperous new year. Hit subscribe if you haven't. Make sure you do click the link and check out the Reflective Edge newsletter as well. I can't thank you all enough for your support. Let's continue to get compassionately curious together. And until next year, take care.